What happens when a brilliant mind is judged not by its capabilities, but by the color of its skin and the symbol around its neck? Samuel Johnson's silver cross necklace, a gift from his grandmother, becomes the flashpoint for conflict with Professor Valletta Harrington, a teacher determined to put him in his place. But beneath Samuel's quiet demeanor lies a mathematical genius that will shake the foundations of Westlake Academy. Will talent be enough to overcome prejudice, or are some barriers too deeply ingrained to break? Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. Samuel Johnson stood at the entrance of Westlake Academy, clutching the worn leather strap of his backpack. The imposing brick facade of the prestigious school seemed to look down on him with judgment. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his grandmother's cross necklace against his chest, a simple silver crucifix on a thin chain that had been her parting gift before he left for this opportunity. "You earned your place here," he whispered to himself, repeating his grandmother's words. The scholarship that brought him to Westlake had been hard-won through countless late nights studying by the dim light of his apartment after his evening shift at the local grocery store. The hallways of Westlake Academy were nothing like his previous school in South Chicago. Here, the floors gleamed with polish, and students dressed in crisp uniforms moved with the confidence that came from generations of privilege. Samuel adjusted his tie, second-hand but meticulously pressed, and checked his schedule. Advanced Calculus with Professor Harrington, room 237. When he entered the classroom, most seats were already filled. A few students glanced his way, their expressions ranging from indifference to curiosity. Samuel chose an empty desk near the middle of the room, not wanting to appear either too eager or too disinterested. Professor Valletta Harrington entered precisely as the bell rang. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, not a strand out of place. Designer glasses perched on her nose as she surveyed the room with cold efficiency. "Welcome to Advanced Calculus," she announced, her voice carrying a clipped precision. "This course separates the exceptional from the merely adequate. Some of you belong here. Others will discover their limitations quite quickly." Her gaze swept across the room, pausing momentarily when it reached Samuel. Something in her expression shifted, so subtle that Samuel nearly missed it, before she continued. "I maintain certain standards in my classroom that may exceed the general school policies. Excellence requires discipline." As Professor Harrington distributed the syllabus, Samuel felt a growing unease. The woman had barely glanced at him, yet he sensed her awareness of his presence, like a discordant note in her carefully composed classroom. "Mr." She paused, consulting her roster. "Johnson, ma'am." "Samuel Johnson." "Mr. Johnson. Transfer student." There was something in her tone, a hint of skepticism, as though his very presence required justification. "Yes, Professor. From Lincoln High in Chicago." A few students exchanged glances. Lincoln High's reputation certainly didn't compare to the feeder schools that typically supplied Westlake with students. "I see," she said, in a way that suggested she saw far more than she was saying. "Well, Mr. Johnson, at Westlake, we build upon a solid foundation. I hope yours is sufficient." Samuel nodded politely, his fingers instinctively reaching for his grandmother's cross beneath his shirt. The small gesture seemed to catch Professor Harrington's attention. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she returned to her introduction without comment. As the class progressed, Samuel took careful notes, determined to prove his place. When Professor Harrington asked a question about limits, his hand raised confidently, but her gaze passed over him, selecting a young woman in the front row instead. By the end of the class, Samuel had not been called on once, despite his repeated attempts to participate. As students filed out, he heard Professor Harrington's voice behind him. "Mr. Johnson, a moment." Samuel turned, meeting her cool gaze. "Your cross necklace. It's visible above your collar." Samuel's hand went to his neck, where the silver cross had indeed slipped out from beneath his shirt. "Religious symbols are to be kept discreet at Westlake. Consider this a friendly reminder." "Yes, Professor," Samuel replied, tucking the necklace back under his shirt. It won't happen again. Professor Harrington's thin smile didn't reach her eyes. See that it doesn't. First impressions matter, Mr. Johnson. And they can be difficult to overcome. 3 weeks into the semester, Samuel had settled into the rigorous routine of Westlake Academy. He'd made few friends, most students kept their distance, whether from indifference or something less benign, but he'd found an unexpected ally in Dylan Rodriguez, a second-generation Colombian-American whose family had the means to match Westlake's elite social circles. Harrington's giving you the freeze-out, Dylan observed as they left calculus class on Friday. Samuel had once again raised his hand multiple times without being acknowledged. Samuel shrugged. I just need to prove myself. It's not about proving yourself. She's decided who belongs and who doesn't. The following Monday, Samuel arrived early to calculus, reviewing his weekend assignment one final time. He'd spent hours ensuring every solution was flawless. As other students filtered in, he noticed several wearing jewelry, expensive watches, designer earrings, even a pendant bearing a family crest. Professor Harrington entered with her typical punctuality, immediately launching into a review of parametric equations. Midway through her explanation, she stopped abruptly, her gaze fixed on Samuel. Mr. Johnson, what is that around your neck? Samuel glanced down. In his concentration, he hadn't noticed his grandmother's cross had slipped out from beneath his collar. My necklace, Professor. I apologize, did I not make myself clear about religious symbols in my classroom? Her voice carried through the now silent room. Yes, Professor, but, no exceptions, Mr. Johnson. School policy requires religious symbols to be discreet. Yours is clearly visible. Samuel carefully tucked the cross back under his shirt. It won't happen again. Professor Harrington's lips thinned. This is your second warning. There are consequences for repeated violations of classroom policy. With all due respect, Professor, Samuel said quietly, Janice is wearing a Star of David, and Tyler has a Buddha charm on his keychain. A dangerous silence fell. Professor Harrington's eyes widened slightly, not with self-awareness, but with indignation. Mr. Johnson, if you wish to dispute my classroom management, you may do so with the dean. In the meantime, there will be a fine of $50 for this disruption. Murmurs rippled through the classroom. Samuel felt heat rise to his face. $50. For a necklace? For insubordination and disrupting the learning environment. My classroom, my rules. She extended her hand. The necklace, please. You may reclaim it upon payment of the fine. Samuel's hand went protectively to the cross. Professor Harrington, this was my grandmother's, the necklace, Mr. Johnson. Now. The classroom had become uncomfortably still. Samuel could feel every eye upon him, witnessing his humiliation. With reluctant fingers, he unclasped the necklace. This isn't right, he said quietly, placing the silver cross in her palm. What isn't right, Mr. Johnson, is challenging authority when you are clearly in violation of stated policy. She dropped the necklace into her desk drawer. Now, shall we continue with parametric equations, or do you have more disruptions planned? Samuel sat in rigid silence, his face burning with anger and shame. Beside him, Dylan gave a barely perceptible shake of his head, a warning not to make things worse. After class, a short, balding man with kind eyes stopped Samuel in the hallway. Mr. Johnson. I'm Professor Jenkins, Physics Department. I couldn't help overhearing what happened in Professor Harrington's class. Samuel steeled himself for another reprimand. That necklace, it's important to you. It was my grandmother's. She raised me after my parents died. She worked 2 jobs so I could focus on school. The words came out clipped, his emotions still too raw. Professor Jenkins nodded thoughtfully. Valletta, Professor Harrington, can be exacting. But what happened today seemed excessive. It was selective enforcement, Samuel said bluntly. Yes, Professor Jenkins agreed, surprising Samuel with his candor. I suspect it was. Give her time to cool off. In the meantime, don't give up. Some battles are worth fighting, even when they seem impossible to win. The next 2 weeks proved Professor Jenkins right about one thing: some battles did indeed seem impossible to win. Samuel picked up extra shifts at his weekend job to earn the $50 for the fine, cutting into his study time. Each calculus class became an exercise in restraint as Professor Harrington found new ways to undermine him. When Samuel correctly answered a question about Taylor series, she responded, "Partially correct, Mr. Johnson, though lacking nuance." Yet when another student gave essentially the same answer moments later, it was praised as precisely articulated. On a particularly difficult assignment, Samuel received a B, with comments about careless errors, despite checking his work multiple times. Looking over Dylan's A-graded paper, he couldn't spot any substantive differences in their approaches. "This is beyond unfair," Dylan said after class one day. "She's grading you by a different standard." Samuel carefully placed his marked paper in his folder. "I can't prove it." "You shouldn't have to prove it. It's obvious to everyone." "Not everyone has the luxury of calling out injustice," Samuel replied. "Some of us are just trying to survive." That night, alone in his small off-campus apartment, Samuel called his grandmother. The familiar creak of her rocking chair came through the phone as she listened to his frustrations. "I miss my necklace, Grandma. It feels like I'm missing a part of you." "Oh, child," her warm voice flowed over him like a bomb, "I'm with you, cross or no cross. But it ain't right what she's doing. I need this scholarship, Grandma. I can't risk losing it by making waves." "Samuel Johnson, your daddy didn't raise no coward before he passed, and neither did I after. Stand your ground, but be smart about it. Show her what you're made of through your work. Excellence is the best revenge." After they hung up, Samuel opened his calculus textbook, but his mind drifted to a memory from his childhood. He was 9, sitting at the kitchen table while his grandmother prepared dinner after her double shift at the hospital. "Why do you wear that cross, Grandma?" he had asked. She had touched the silver crucifix gently. "It reminds me there's purpose in suffering. Your grandfather gave me this the day before he shipped out to Vietnam. Never came home, but his love did. Some things are worth enduring pain for, Samuel. Education is one of them." The memory strengthened his resolve. He pulled out a separate notebook, one filled not with the assigned calculus problems, but with his own explorations. Since he was 15, Samuel had been developing his own approach to certain calculus theorems, inspired by an obscure paper he'd found in the public library. The work was raw, intuitive, lacking formal rigor, but it felt right in a way he couldn't explain. The next day in class, Professor Harrington announced a pop quiz. As she distributed the papers, she paused at Samuel's desk. "I noticed you haven't paid your fine yet, Mr. Johnson." "I get paid Friday, Professor. You'll have it then." She placed his quiz face down on his desk with a slight smile. "Looking forward to it." The quiz contained material they hadn't covered yet, derivatives of multivariable functions with constraints. Samuel recognized it from his independent reading and worked through the problems methodically. When he turned in his paper, Professor Harrington barely glanced at it. Later that day, Professor Jenkins stopped him in the hallway. "Samuel, I heard about the calculus quiz. Several students complained it contained advanced material." "It wasn't in our assigned reading," Samuel confirmed. "How did you do?" "I think I did okay. I've been reading ahead." Professor Jenkins studied him thoughtfully. "Westlake is hosting the Northeastern Calculus Competition this year. It's prestigious, colleges send scouts. You should consider participating." "Professor Harrington selects the team," Samuel pointed out. "Yes, but there's a qualifying exam first, open to all students. Technically, she can't prevent anyone from taking it." Jenkins smiled. "Sometimes, Samuel, the most effective way through a barrier is to go around it." That evening, as Samuel worked his shift restocking shelves, he contemplated the professor's suggestion. The competition could be an opportunity to prove himself without directly confronting Professor Harrington. It was a risk. Failure would only confirm her low opinion of him, but success might force her to acknowledge his abilities. On Friday, Samuel placed an envelope containing $50 on Professor Harrington's desk before class. "You're fine, Professor. May I have my necklace back?" She opened the drawer and removed the silver cross, letting it dangle from her fingers. "A reminder, Mr. Johnson, next time, the fine doubles. Some lessons need repetition to take hold." As Samuel reached for the necklace, she added, "I assume you'll be focusing on the required coursework rather than distractions like the calculus competition. Students with borderline performance should concentrate on fundamentals first." Samuel met her gaze steadily as he clasped his grandmother's cross around his neck. "I believe I can manage both, Professor." Something flickered in her eyes, annoyance, certainly, but perhaps a hint of something else. Challenge, perhaps. Or fear. "We'll see, Mr. Johnson. We'll see." The library at Westlake Academy closed at midnight, but the security guard, Mr. Tanner, had taken a liking to Samuel. "Just lock up when you're done," he'd say with a wink, leaving Samuel alone among the stacks until the early morning hours. Tonight, Samuel sat at a secluded table surrounded by advanced calculus texts. His assigned homework lay completed at the corner of the desk, but his attention focused on his personal notebook, filled with his theoretical approach to optimization problems. He'd been developing these ideas since high school, inspired by an article about unconventional mathematical approaches. Samuel was so absorbed in his work that he didn't notice Dylan until his classmate pulled out the chair across from him. "Dude, it's almost 2 a.m., Dylan whispered, eyeing the scattered books. "What are you doing with multivariable analysis? We're not covering that for weeks." Samuel hastily closed his notebook. "Just getting ahead." Dylan reached across and flipped the notebook open. His eyes widened as he scanned the pages filled with complex equations and annotations. "This isn't getting ahead. This is original work." Samuel shrugged uncomfortably. "Just some ideas I've been playing with." "Some ideas?" "Sam, this looks like research-level calculus." Dylan's expression shifted from surprise to excitement. "Does Harrington know you can do this?" "Harrington barely acknowledges I can add fractions," Samuel replied, bitterness seeping into his voice. "Besides, it's probably nothing. I don't have the formal training to know if any of this makes sense." Dylan pulled the notebook closer. "My uncle's a math professor at MIT. He publishes papers on optimization theory. This looks similar to stuff he's shown me." A wave of uncertainty washed over Samuel. "It's just intuition. I don't have proofs for most of it." "Intuition is where breakthroughs start," Dylan insisted. "You should show this to someone." "Not Harrington." "Definitely not Harrington," Dylan agreed. "Professor Jenkins, maybe." The next day, Professor Harrington assigned a particularly challenging project, an exploration of applications of differential equations in physical systems. As she distributed the assignment sheets, she paused by Samuel's desk. "I expect rigorous mathematical proofs, Mr. Johnson. Not loose approximations." Her emphasis made it clear the comment was meant for him alone. Samuel nodded without meeting her gaze, already formulating his approach. The assignment was challenging but not beyond his capabilities, especially with the extra reading he'd been doing. That evening, Samuel worked intently, losing track of time as he developed elegant solutions to the problems. When he finally finished, he felt a rare sense of satisfaction. His work was beyond reproach, every step meticulously documented, every conclusion supported by solid mathematical reasoning. He hesitated before placing the assignment in his folder. Professor Harrington had found fault with his flawless work before. What would stop her from doing so again? "Excellence is the best revenge," his grandmother had said. But what if excellence wasn't enough? What if the game was rigged from the start? Samuel's phone buzzed with a message from Dylan, you entering the calculus competition. Registration deadline tomorrow. Samuel stared at the message, conflicted. The competition would be another opportunity for Harrington to undermine him, yet it also offered a chance to be judged objectively by external mathematicians. After a long moment, he typed his reply, "I'm in." The next morning, Samuel arrived early to submit his differential equations project. The classroom was empty except for Professor Harrington, who sat grading papers at her desk. "Finished already, Mr. Johnson?" She accepted his project with obvious skepticism. "Yes, Professor." She flipped through the pages, her eyebrows rising slightly as she scanned his work. For a brief moment, something like surprise crossed her features before her expression reset to its usual cool assessment. "We'll see if substance matches appearance," she said dismissively, placing his project in a folder. As Samuel turned to leave, she added, "I noticed your name on the competition registration list." "Yes, Professor. The Northeastern Calculus competition isn't some high school math bowl, Mr. Johnson. It requires sophisticated mathematical maturity." Samuel met her gaze evenly. "I understand what it requires, Professor." "Do you?" A hint of challenge entered her voice. "The preliminary exam is designed to eliminate those who aren't prepared. It would be unfortunate to face such public disappointment." "I'll take my chances," Samuel replied, hand reflexively touching his grandmother's cross beneath his shirt. Harrington noticed the gesture, her lips thinning. "Your confidence is admirable, if misplaced. I'd suggest focusing your energies on fundamentals." As the semester progressed, Samuel continued his dual academic life, performing excellently in his required coursework while secretly developing his theoretical mathematics in the library's quiet hours. He kept his notebook hidden, aware that his ideas, still raw and unpolished, would be easy targets for criticism. What he didn't realize was that his mathematical talent was becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. In group work, other students began to defer to his insights. Even some of Westlake's privileged elite grudgingly acknowledged his abilities. Only Professor Harrington remained unmoved, maintaining her pattern of oversight and criticism. But occasionally, Samuel caught her watching him with an unreadable expression, as though confronting a puzzle whose pieces didn't fit her preconceptions. The day of the qualification exam arrived with an atmosphere of nervous energy throughout the mathematics department. The exam, notorious for its difficulty, would determine which students would represent Westlake at the prestigious Northeastern Calculus competition. Samuel arrived early, finding the designated classroom already half filled with Westlake's top mathematics students. Most were seniors, many already accepted to elite universities. They eyed Samuel with curiosity or dismissal as he took a seat near the window. Professor Jenkins supervised the examination, while Professor Harrington sat at the back of the room, observing. As Jenkins distributed the exam booklets, he offered an encouraging nod to Samuel. "You have 3 hours," Jenkins announced. "Show all work. Partial credit will be awarded for sound methodology even without complete solutions." Samuel opened his booklet and immediately understood why the exam was legendary. The problems blended pure theory with practical applications, requiring not just technical skill but creative insight. He suppressed a smile. This was exactly the kind of mathematics he loved. The room fell silent except for the scratch of pencils and occasional sighs of frustration. Samuel worked steadily, moving from problem to problem with focused intensity. When he encountered a particularly challenging integral, he closed his eyes briefly, visualizing the approach he'd been developing in his private notebook. From the back of the room, Valletta Harrington watched Samuel with growing discomfort. Unlike the other students who showed visible signs of struggle, Johnson worked with unsettling confidence. His pencil moved across the page without hesitation, as though the solutions were obvious to him. Impossible, she thought. These problems challenged graduate students. 2 hours into the exam, Samuel placed his pencil down and reviewed his work. Satisfied, he gathered his papers and approached the front desk, aware of the surprised glances from students still wrestling with the first problems. "Finished, Mr. Johnson?" Professor Jenkins asked, accepting his booklet. "Yes, sir." Harrington's voice cut across the room. Giving up so soon? Several students looked up, distracted by the exchange. I've completed the exam, Professor, Samuel replied quietly. Jenkins nodded, signaling Samuel could leave. As he walked out, Samuel felt Harrington's gaze following him, sharp with suspicion. 3 days later, Professor Jenkins posted the results outside the mathematics department. A crowd gathered as students searched for their names on the short list of qualifiers. Samuel pushed through to find his name at the top, a perfect score. Impossible, someone muttered. No one gets a perfect score on the qual exam. Dylan clapped Samuel on the shoulder. Told you, man. You're not just good, you're exceptional. As the crowd dispersed, Samuel noticed Professor Harrington studying the list, her face tight with displeasure. When she saw him watching, she beckoned him over. Congratulations, Mr. Johnson, she said, the words clearly difficult for her. It seems you'll be representing Westlake after all. Thank you, Professor. I'll be selecting the final team composition based on more than just this exam, of course. Experience, consistency, temperament, all factor into preparing a successful team. The implication was clear, she still controlled his participation. Of course, Professor. I look forward to contributing however I can. That afternoon, Samuel received an email calling him to Professor Jenkins' office. He found both Jenkins and Harrington waiting for him. Samuel, Jenkins began warmly, congratulations on your extraordinary performance. Thank you, sir. Professor Harrington and I were just discussing the team composition. Jenkins glanced at his colleague. Given your score, you've undoubtedly earned a place. Harrington's smile didn't reach her eyes. Indeed. Though I maintain concerns about your experience level. Perhaps those concerns could be addressed through targeted mentoring, Jenkins suggested. Samuel has demonstrated exceptional potential. Samuel stood quietly, aware he was witnessing a subtle power struggle between the professors. I suppose we could implement a probationary period, Harrington conceded reluctantly. With additional practice sessions to ensure readiness. Later, as Samuel left the building, Professor Jenkins caught up with him. That was a diplomatic compromise, he said with a hint of irony. Behind that perfect score, what else are you hiding, Samuel? Samuel hesitated. Nothing important, sir. Jenkins studied him thoughtfully. I think we both know that's not true. But some talents need nurturing before they're ready for scrutiny. Just know you have allies here. As Samuel walked away, he felt a cautious optimism. For the first time since arriving at Westlake, he'd earned undeniable recognition for his abilities. Whether Professor Harrington liked it or not, he had earned his place. Valletta Harrington sat alone in her office, reviewing Samuel Johnson's qualification exam for the third time. The elegant solutions defied her expectations, and challenged assumptions she hadn't realized she held until confronted with evidence to the contrary. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in. Dean Whitmore entered, his tailored suit and carefully cultivated silver hair embodying Westlake's polished image. Valletta, a word about the Johnson situation. She stiffened. What situation would that be? Several board members attended the department reception last night. They were quite impressed by his qualification score. The Fosters specifically asked if he might be, he paused delicately, scholarship material for their foundation. The Fosters, Valletta repeated. The family's endowment funded 3 faculty positions, including her own. Indeed. Apparently, their grandson mentioned him. They're interested in his background. Whitmore's emphasis carried unmistakable meaning. You mean they're interested in his race, Valletta stated flatly. Whitmore's smile tightened. Diversity initiatives are part of Westlake's strategic plan, Valletta. Johnson represents an opportunity. He's a student, not an opportunity. He can be both. Whitmore straightened his already immaculate cuffs. The point is, the board is watching. Your handling of this situation will be noted. After the dean left, Valletta remained at her desk, a hollow feeling spreading through her chest. 20 years at Westlake, and what had she become? The gatekeeping defender of an institution that commodified even excellence when it appeared in unexpected packages. She had prided herself on high standards, on pushing students beyond complacency. When had that transformed into something uglier? Across campus, Samuel faced his own crisis. His part-time job had cut his hours, leaving him short on rent. The fine from Professor Harrington had depleted his meager savings, and the additional practices for the competition team cut into potential working hours. "I might have to drop out," he admitted to Dylan as they studied in the library. "I can't afford to stay." "What about your scholarship?" "It covers tuition, not living expenses. Between rent, food, and textbooks." Samuel shook his head. "The math doesn't work." Dylan considered this. "My parents have an empty apartment above their garage. It's nothing fancy, but I can't accept charity." "It's not charity, it's a solution. You could help tutor my sister in exchange. She's struggling with pre-calculus." Samuel hesitated. His pride battled with practicality. "Just until you figure things out," Dylan pressed. "Think about it." That evening, Samuel called his grandmother, feeling the weight of potential failure. "I promised I wouldn't quit," he said, voice tight with frustration. "But I didn't realize how hard it would be just to survive here." "Life doesn't give guarantees, child," his grandmother replied. "Your grandfather used to say, dignity doesn't pay bills, but without it, nothing else matters." "What does that even mean?" "It means accept help when it's offered honestly, but never surrender your self-respect. That cross around your neck isn't just silver, Samuel. It's a reminder that suffering has purpose, that sacrifice leads to redemption." After they hung up, Samuel touched the cross, remembering the day his grandmother had given it to him. He'd just received his scholarship to Westlake, a miracle neither of them had dared hope for. "Your grandfather wore this in Vietnam," she'd said, placing it around his neck. "It came back with his body. I wore it through raising your father alone, then through raising you after we lost him and your mother. Now it's your turn to carry it through your battles." The memory strengthened his resolve. He texted Dylan, accepting the offer of the garage apartment. Meanwhile, Valletta Harrington found herself unable to focus on her evening's grading. Samuel Johnson's exam solutions kept intruding on her thoughts, along with uncomfortable questions about her treatment of him. Had she been unfair? The rational part of her mind argued she had simply maintained standards. Yet honesty forced her to acknowledge she had applied those standards unequally. On impulse, she pulled his student file. His previous school in Chicago was in a neighborhood she knew only from news reports of violence and poverty. Despite this, his transcript showed perfect grades in mathematics, with a recommendation letter from his previous teacher describing extraordinary mathematical intuition. She compared his Westlake assignments with those of other top students. His work was consistently superior, yet she had found reasons to mark him down: unclear explanation, when his wording differed from her preferred phrasing, insufficient rigor, when his approach varied from textbook methods, despite reaching correct conclusions. The realization left a sour taste. She had built her identity around mathematical integrity, yet her evaluations had been compromised by biases she had refused to acknowledge. The next day, Valletta observed Samuel from a distance during team practice. Despite her earlier hostility, he worked diligently, patiently explaining concepts to teammates struggling with advanced problems. There was no resentment in his manner, only focused determination. When practice ended, she noticed him checking his watch anxiously before rushing out. Curiosity prompted her to follow discreetly. Outside, she watched him run across campus, change into a uniform shirt behind a building, and hurry toward the campus coffee shop. Through the window, she observed him working behind the counter, serving students who had been his classroom peers minutes earlier. Some treated him with casual indifference, others with the subtle condescension of the privileged toward those who served them. Something shifted in Valletta's perception, a recognition of layers to Samuel's experience at Westlake that she had never considered. The simple cross necklace he wore faithfully despite her penalties carried meanings beyond religious symbolism. He was fighting battles on multiple fronts, yet still excelling in ways she had refused to acknowledge. For the first time, Valletta Harrington felt the uncomfortable weight of shame. The regional qualifying round of the Northeastern Calculus competition was held at Bridgewater University, a 2-hour drive from Westlake. The team, 5 students including Samuel, traveled in the school's van with Professor Harrington driving and Professor Jenkins accompanying as faculty advisor. Samuel sat quietly in the back, reviewing notes while the other students chatted confidently about their expected performance. Most came from families with long histories of academic achievement. For them, the competition was another line on already impressive resumes. "Johnson, you're unusually quiet," Professor Harrington observed, catching his eye in the rearview mirror. Her tone lacked its usual edge. "Just focusing, Professor," Samuel replied. "Well, remember, team performance matters as much as individual achievement. Support your colleagues." The campus buzzed with activity as teams from 30 prestigious schools gathered. Samuel followed his teammates into the registration area, where coordinators distributed badges and materials. "Name?" asked a gray-haired administrator when Samuel reached the table. "Samuel Johnson, Westlake Academy." The woman scanned her list with a frown. "I don't see." "Ah, here you are, at the bottom. Late edition." "No," Professor Jenkins interjected, stepping forward. "Mr. Johnson was our top qualifier." The woman looked between Samuel and Jenkins with poorly disguised surprise. "I see. Well, everything seems in order." Throughout the morning, Samuel endured similar moments, subtle questioning of his presence, assumptions that he must be a diversity inclusion rather than a top competitor. Each interaction reinforced what he already knew: in these spaces, his abilities would always be suspect until proven beyond doubt. The individual round came first, 3 hours of intensive problem-solving covering everything from basic calculus to advanced theoretical mathematics. Samuel worked steadily, finding a rhythm that allowed him to navigate even the most challenging problems. When he completed the last question, he felt a quiet confidence. Not certainty, he was too methodical for that, but satisfaction in having done his best. The team round followed after lunch. 5 students per school worked collectively on problems designed to test not just mathematical ability but collaboration. Samuel's teammates, who had maintained a polite distance until now, suddenly looked to him with new respect. "That integral from the individual round was brutal," commented Eliza Chen, a senior with MIT aspirations. "The substitution trick was counterintuitive," Samuel acknowledged. "I tried 3 approaches before giving up," admitted Tyler Roberts, whose father was a renowned physicist. "How did you see it?" As Samuel explained his methodology, he noticed Professor Harrington watching from across the room, her expression thoughtful. The team round proved even more challenging, with problems explicitly designed to require diverse approaches. To Samuel's surprise, his teammates began deferring to him on the most difficult questions. "What about this one?" Eliza pushed a particularly complex optimization problem toward him. Samuel studied it briefly. "This reminds me of something I've been working on independently. If we approach it using vector fields instead of traditional constraints." His teammates watched in fascination as he outlined an elegant solution that bypassed pages of calculations. "That's not in the textbook," Tyler observed. "No," Samuel agreed. "But it works." By day's end, both individual and team results were tabulated. Westlake had placed first in a team competition, with Samuel earning the highest individual score across all schools. As they gathered for the awards ceremony, Professor Jenkins beamed with undisguised pride. Even Professor Harrington offered a tight smile as the announcer called Westlake forward to receive their advancement to the championship round. "Exceptional performance," she acknowledged as they returned to the van. "Particularly your vector field approach, Mr. Johnson. I don't recall covering that methodology." "You didn't, Professor," Samuel replied honestly. "It was something I developed on my own." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "Developed?" Based on some research papers I found. I've been exploring alternative approaches to constrained optimization problems. Before she could respond, Professor Jenkins intervened. That's precisely the kind of original thinking the championship judges will appreciate, Samuel. On the drive back, Samuel sat with his teammates, no longer relegated to the isolation of the back seat. Something had shifted, his mathematical ability had transcended the social barriers that his background and appearance had erected. As they approached Westlake, Professor Harrington cleared her throat. The championship is in 6 weeks. We'll need intensive preparation. Mr. Johnson, your approach today suggests you might contribute some unconventional perspectives to our strategy. It wasn't quite an apology, nor a complete transformation. But in acknowledging his potential contribution, she had taken a first small step toward seeing him as more than an unwelcome intrusion in her carefully ordered domain. Samuel nodded, feeling the weight of his grandmother's cross against his chest. I'm happy to share what I know, Professor. The weeks following the regional qualifier brought subtle changes to Samuel's Westlake experience. His teammates sought him out for study sessions, and classmates who had previously ignored him began acknowledging him in hallways. Professor Harrington maintained her formal demeanor, but her open antagonism had given way to a watchful assessment. One evening, after an intensive practice session for the championship, Samuel accidentally left his personal notebook in the classroom. He realized his mistake halfway back to Dylan's family garage apartment and turned around, hurrying through the darkening campus. When he reached the mathematics building, he was surprised to find lights still on in the classroom. Through the window, he saw Professor Harrington at his desk, his notebook open before her. Samuel's heart raced as he pushed through the door. Professor Harrington. She looked up, startled. For the first time since he'd known her, Valletta Harrington appeared flustered. Mr. Johnson. I was just. That's my personal notebook, Samuel said, trying to keep accusation from his voice. Yes, she acknowledged, making no move to close it. You left it behind. I was going to put it in my office for safekeeping, but then I noticed the content. Her finger rested on a page filled with his theoretical work. What exactly is this? Samuel approached cautiously. Just some ideas I've been exploring. These aren't just some ideas, Mr. Johnson. This appears to be original theoretical work on optimization algorithms. Her voice held something new, professional curiosity overriding personal bias. How long have you been developing this approach? Since high school, Samuel admitted. My previous calculus teacher encouraged me after I found a more efficient solution to a problem in our textbook. Professor Harrington studied him with new intensity. Did you understand that what you were doing wasn't just solving problems differently, but potentially developing new mathematical methods? Samuel shifted uncomfortably. I knew it wasn't the standard approach. Standard, she repeated, a hint of incredulity entering her voice. Mr. Johnson, I've been teaching advanced calculus for 20 years. This work, she gestured at the notebook, is beyond non-standard. It's innovative. Samuel remained silent, unsure how to respond to this unexpected assessment. Professor Harrington closed the notebook carefully. I'd like to show this to a colleague at the university, with your permission, of course. Dr. Marcus specializes in computational optimization theory. He would be better qualified than I to evaluate the significance of your approach. The request caught Samuel off guard. After months of dismissal and criticism, Harrington was treating his work with sudden professional respect. I suppose that would be all right, he agreed cautiously. Excellent. She handed him the notebook. In the meantime, I'd be interested to hear more about how you developed these ideas. For the next hour, Samuel explained his mathematical journey, how his intuitive understanding of calculus had led him to question conventional approaches, how he'd spent countless hours in public libraries researching obscure papers that might support his theories. As he spoke, he watched Professor Harrington's expression transform from skepticism to reluctant admiration to genuine intellectual engagement. For the first time, they were speaking the universal language of mathematics without the barriers of race, background, or prejudice. Your approach reminds me of Ramanujan, she observed. He developed advanced mathematics with minimal formal training, relying on extraordinary intuition. I read about him, Samuel admitted. His story gave me hope that maybe my ideas weren't completely without merit. They have substantial merit, Professor Harrington confirmed. Though they would benefit from formal development. She hesitated, then added, development I could perhaps assist with, if you're amenable. Samuel studied her, trying to reconcile this offering with the woman who had publicly humiliated him over his grandmother's cross. Why the change of heart, Professor? The directness of his question seemed to catch her off guard. She considered her response carefully. Mathematics doesn't care about my biases, Mr. Johnson. It demands intellectual honesty. She met his gaze directly. I haven't been honest in my assessment of your abilities. For that, I owe you an apology. It wasn't an expansive acknowledgement of the unfairness he'd endured, but within the context of their relationship, it represented a significant concession. I appreciate that, Professor, Samuel said quietly. Don't misunderstand, she clarified, some of her usual crispness returning. I'm not suggesting your work is flawless. It needs substantial refinement. But the foundation. She paused. The foundation is remarkably sound. As Samuel left the building, notebook securely in his backpack, he felt a cautious optimism. The mathematical world he loved operated on principles of provable truth. Within that realm, even Valletta Harrington couldn't deny the evidence before her. 3 days later, Samuel received an email requesting his presence in Professor Harrington's office. He arrived to find her seated with an older man whose disheveled appearance contrasted sharply with Harrington's meticulous presentation. Samuel, this is Dr. Marcus from the university, Professor Harrington introduced. He's reviewed your work. Dr. Marcus leaned forward eagerly. Young man, your approach to vector optimization is fascinating. The intuitive leap you've made bypasses several computational roadblocks in current methodologies. So, it makes sense? Samuel asked cautiously. Makes sense. Marcus chuckled. With proper development, it could potentially be publishable. Where did you study before Westlake? Lincoln High in South Chicago, sir. Marcus's eyebrows rose. And who mentored your mathematical development there? No one specifically, sir. I worked mostly on my own. Marcus exchanged a glance with Professor Harrington. Remarkable. Simply remarkable. The day of the Northeastern Calculus Championship arrived with a flurry of media attention. 16 elite schools would compete for recognition and the coveted Leibniz Trophy, with college recruiters and mathematics faculty observing closely. Samuel adjusted his tie in the hotel mirror, the silver cross visible above his collar. For the first time since coming to Westlake, he wore it openly, without fear of penalty. Professor Harrington had not mentioned it again after returning it, and Samuel took her silence as tacit acceptance. The team gathered in the hotel lobby, all wearing Westlake's formal attire, navy blazers with the school crest. Professor Jenkins distributed identification badges while Professor Harrington reviewed last-minute strategy. Remember, the individual round establishes our baseline, but the team round determines the championship. Play to your strengths, Tyler on differential equations, Eliza on analysis, Maria on applications, David on theory. She paused, meeting Samuel's gaze. And Samuel on unconventional approaches. Don't be afraid to challenge conventional methodologies if you see a more elegant solution. The venue was impressive, a university mathematics building with modern facilities and an auditorium for the final announcements. Teams were directed to assigned rooms for the individual round, each student isolated from teammates to prevent collaboration. As Samuel took his seat, he noticed several competition officials watching him with undisguised curiosity. His performance in the qualifier had apparently generated interest. You're Johnson. One judge confirmed, checking his badge. Yes, sir. Your qualifier results were exceptional. Looking forward to seeing your work today. The individual problems pushed the boundaries of undergraduate mathematics, requiring not just technical skill but creative insight. Samuel worked methodically, drawing on both his formal training and his intuitive understanding. When he encountered a particularly challenging integral, he closed his eyes briefly, centering himself by touching his grandmother's cross. After 3 intensive hours, the individual round concluded. Teams reunited in the dining hall for lunch before the critical team round that would determine the championship. "How did it go?" Tyler asked as the Westlake team gathered at their table. "Challenging," Eliza admitted. "That series convergence problem was brutal." "I think I found an approach," Samuel offered. "By transforming it into an improper integral." As he explained his methodology, he noticed Professor Harrington listening intently from nearby. When he finished, she nodded slightly, a small gesture of approval that would have seemed impossible months earlier. The team round introduced a new format. Each team was given a single, extremely difficult problem with multiple interconnected parts. Success required recognizing how different mathematical domains interfaced and leveraging each team member's specialty. Westlake's problem involved optimizing a complex system with multiple constraints, exactly the kind of challenge that aligned with Samuel's theoretical work. "This is similar to what you've been developing," Professor Harrington noted quietly as the team analyzed the problem. "Your vector field approach might be applicable." Samuel nodded, already seeing the connections. "If we restructure the constraint space." He began sketching a diagram, explaining his vision to his teammates. For 2 hours, the team worked collaboratively, building on Samuel's framework while incorporating each member's expertise. When a dispute arose between Tyler and Eliza about the best approach to a critical sub-problem, Samuel mediated, finding a synthesis that preserved both insights. Professor Harrington observed from the back of the room, her expression unreadable. Yet Samuel sensed a shift in her assessment, not just of him, but of her own role as an educator. As time expired, the Westlake team submitted their solution with quiet confidence. While other teams looked exhausted or uncertain, Samuel's teammates displayed the calm satisfaction of having produced their best work. The judges retired to evaluate all submissions, leaving teams and faculty to mingle anxiously in the main hall. Several university professors approached Samuel, introducing themselves and asking pointed questions about his mathematical background. "Have you considered graduate programs?" one Stanford professor inquired. "I'm still finishing my undergraduate prerequisites," Samuel explained. "With your talent, certain prerequisites might be waivable," the professor suggested, handing Samuel his card. "Let's continue this conversation." Professor Harrington, overhearing this exchange, stepped forward. "Samuel has extraordinary potential," she confirmed, surprising Samuel with her endorsement. "His approach to vector optimization is particularly innovative." The Stanford professor raised his eyebrows. "Indeed? I'd be interested to learn more." Before Samuel could respond, the announcement came for all teams to assemble in the auditorium for results. The air hummed with tension as judges took the stage. After careful evaluation, the chief judge announced, "We are prepared to reveal this year's champions." The individual awards came first, with Samuel taking second place overall, a remarkable achievement for a sophomore among primarily senior competitors. Then came the team results, announced in ascending order. As other schools were called for 5th, 4th, and 3rd places, the Westlake team grew increasingly tense. And in first place, with an elegant solution that impressed our entire judging panel, Westlake Academy. The team erupted in celebration. As they made their way to the stage to accept the Leibniz Trophy, Samuel felt a hand on his shoulder. Professor Harrington stood beside him, her usual composure softened by genuine pride. "Your approach was the key," she acknowledged quietly. "You saw connections none of us recognized." On stage, surrounded by his celebrating teammates, Samuel caught a glimpse of Professor Harrington standing at the edge of the audience. For the first time since he'd known her, she was smiling without reservation or calculation, the smile of a teacher witnessing a student's triumph. The Monday after the championship, Westlake Academy buzzed with excitement. The victory had been featured in the local newspaper, with particular mention of Samuel's contribution. Students who had previously ignored him now offered congratulations in hallways, while teachers who had regarded him with indifference suddenly found reasons to engage him in conversation. Samuel navigated this newfound attention with quiet dignity, neither seeking nor rejecting the recognition. He had come to Westlake for education, not accolades, and remained focused on his goals despite the shifting social landscape. When he entered calculus class, conversations hushed momentarily before resuming with increased energy. Professor Harrington hadn't yet arrived, unusual, given her notorious punctuality. Samuel took his seat, reviewing notes from the previous lesson. 5 minutes after the bell, Professor Harrington entered, her typically immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. She placed her materials on the desk without the precise arrangement that usually characterized her preparations. "Good morning," she began, her voice lacking its usual crisp authority. "Before we continue with our scheduled lesson, I have an announcement." She paused, surveying the room. "Our victory at the Northeastern Championship represents a significant achievement for Westlake. All team members contributed admirably." The class murmured in agreement, several students glancing toward Samuel. However, Harrington continued, "Exceptional contributions deserve exceptional recognition. Mr. Johnson's approach to the team problem demonstrated mathematical intuition that," she hesitated, seemingly struggling with her words, "that I initially failed to recognize and respect." A charged silence filled the classroom. Students exchanged glances, sensing the unusual nature of this acknowledgement from a professor known for her unyielding standards rather than her capacity for self-reflection. "In light of this, I've submitted a formal recommendation that Samuel receive the Westlake Mathematics Prize, typically reserved for graduating seniors. The committee has unanimously approved this exception." Samuel stared at her in disbelief. The Mathematics Prize was Westlake's most prestigious departmental honor, carrying not just recognition but a substantial financial award. Additionally, Professor Harrington continued, her gaze now fixed directly on Samuel, "I owe Mr. Johnson a personal apology." The classroom grew impossibly still. Dylan, seated beside Samuel, nudged him in quiet astonishment. "My treatment of you earlier this semester reflected biases and assumptions that have no place in education. Your mathematical ability deserved recognition from the beginning. More importantly, your dignity as a student deserved respect." She took a deep breath. "The fine I imposed regarding your necklace was inappropriate and selectively enforced." From her desk, she lifted a small envelope. "This contains the $50 you paid, which I am returning." She placed it on the edge of her desk. "I would appreciate it if you would accept this reimbursement after class." Samuel nodded silently, processing this unexpected public acknowledgement. "Now," Professor Harrington said, her voice regaining some of its professional composure, "let's continue with Taylor's series approximations." The remainder of the class proceeded with an unusual energy, students still absorbing the significance of what they had witnessed. When the bell rang, most gathered their materials quickly, eager to spread news of Harrington's unprecedented apology throughout Westlake's gossip network. Samuel approached her desk after the room had cleared. "Professor," he began, uncertain how to respond to her public statement. "Mr. Johnson." She handed him the envelope. "I meant what I said. The fine was unwarranted." "Thank you," he said simply, accepting the envelope. An awkward silence stretched between them, the teacher who had systematically undermined him and the student whose abilities had forced her to confront her prejudices. "Your notebook," she said finally. "Dr. Marcus is quite interested in publishing a paper on your optimization approach, with you as primary author." Samuel's eyes widened. "Primary author? But I don't have the formal background." "You have the ideas," she interrupted. "The formal structure can be developed collaboratively." She hesitated. "If you're willing, I'd like to assist in that process." Samuel studied her, trying to reconcile this offer with their difficult history. "Why?" The directness of his question seemed to catch her off guard. For a moment, her carefully maintained facade faltered, revealing something more human underneath the professional exterior. "Because mathematics deserves honest recognition, regardless of its source." She met his gaze directly. And because I need to be better than what I've shown you. Samuel touched his grandmother's cross, considering her words. The necklace had become a silent witness to his journey at Westlake, from exclusion to reluctant acceptance to this unexpected moment of reconciliation. I would welcome your assistance, Professor, he said finally. The work needs development. Relief softened her features briefly before her professional demeanor reasserted itself. Excellent. We can arrange a schedule that accommodates your other commitments. As Samuel turned to leave, she added, your cross. He paused, hand automatically moving to protect the silver crucifix. It means something important to you, doesn't it? Her tone held genuine curiosity rather than judgment. It was my grandmother's, Samuel explained. She raised me after my parents died. It reminds me that struggles have purpose. Professor Harrington nodded slowly. Wear it proudly, Mr. Johnson. I won't interfere again. Outside the mathematics building, Dylan waited impatiently. Dude, did Harrington actually apologize? The whole school's talking about it. She did, Samuel confirmed, still processing the interaction. That's like witnessing a solar eclipse while being struck by lightning during a blue moon, Dylan marveled. Harrington never admits mistakes. What did she say after class? Samuel considered sharing the details of their conversation but decided against it. The apology had been public, but the more meaningful exchange afterward felt private, a fragile beginning of something that deserved protection from Westlake's rumor mill. She's going to help develop my calculus work for publication, he said simply. Dylan shook his head in amazement. From finding you to co-authoring with you. That's some transformation. Samuel touched his grandmother's cross thoughtfully. It's a start. Over the following weeks, a cautious collaboration developed between Samuel and Professor Harrington. Twice weekly, they met in her office to refine his mathematical theories, transforming intuitive insights into rigorous proofs suitable for academic publication. These sessions revealed dimensions to both of them that had previously remained hidden. Samuel discovered that beneath Harrington's intimidating exterior lay a genuinely brilliant mathematician with a gift for structural clarity. Valletta Harrington, meanwhile, encountered a mathematical creativity she had rarely seen in decades of teaching, an ability to see connections across different domains that even seasoned mathematicians often missed. Your approach here, she observed during one session, indicating a section of his work, reminds me of Poincaré's geometric insights. Have you studied his work? Only what I could find in the public library, Samuel admitted. They didn't have many advanced mathematics texts. Professor Harrington made a note. I'll lend you my copy of his collected papers. Your intuitive leaps would benefit from seeing how he formalized similar insights. Their working relationship remained primarily academic, neither addressing directly the months of unfair treatment that had preceded their collaboration. Yet small changes signaled an evolving perspective on Harrington's part. When other faculty members referred to Samuel as, your calculus prodigy, with a hint of condescension regarding his background, she corrected them firmly, Mr. Johnson is a mathematician of considerable promise, regardless of where he began his studies. In class, she began calling on Samuel regularly, no longer passing over his raised hand. When he offered alternative approaches to standard problems, she engaged with his ideas substantively instead of dismissing them as deviations from accepted methodology. The most significant change came 3 weeks after the championship. Professor Harrington called Samuel to her office, where she sat with Dean Whitmore and an elegantly dressed couple Samuel didn't recognize. Samuel, these are Mr. and Mrs. Foster, Harrington introduced. They fund several academic initiatives at Westlake and have expressed interest in your mathematical work. Professor Harrington has shared some of your remarkable insights, Mr. Foster said, extending his hand. We're quite impressed. The Fosters maintain a scholarship foundation, Dean Whitmore explained, his solicitous tone conveying the couple's importance to Westlake. They're considering creating a special fellowship. Mrs. Foster smiled warmly. We support exceptional students pursuing advanced mathematical research. Professor Harrington suggested you would be an ideal candidate. Samuel glanced at his calculus teacher in surprise. Harrington's expression remained professional, but he detected something like advocacy in her posture, a protective stance he would have thought impossible months earlier. The fellowship would cover all expenses, Mr. Foster continued. Tuition, housing, books, research materials. Additionally, it would include funding for summer research opportunities and conference attendance. That's extremely generous, Samuel said carefully. Talent deserves nurturing, Mrs. Foster replied. Particularly when it emerges from circumstances that might otherwise limit its development. The implications were clear. They knew about his background and found his achievement more remarkable because of it. Samuel felt a familiar discomfort, the sense of being viewed as exceptional, despite, rather than simply exceptional. Before he could respond, Professor Harrington intervened. The Foster's Fellowship would recognize mathematical ability, not biographical details, she stated firmly. Samuel's work stands on its merit alone. The couple exchanged glances, seeming mildly surprised by her directness. Of course, Mr. Foster agreed. The quality of the mathematics is what matters. After the meeting concluded and the others departed, Samuel remained in Harrington's office, processing what had occurred. You recommended me for the fellowship, he said finally. Your work deserves support, she replied simply. The Fosters can provide resources Westlake Standard scholarships don't cover. They seemed focused on my background. Harrington sighed, removing her glasses to rub the bridge of her nose, a rare gesture revealing fatigue beneath her composed exterior. Many benefactors find inspiration in narratives of exceptional achievement against odds. It can be intrusive. You defended me, Samuel observed. You made it about the mathematics. Because it should be about the mathematics. She replaced her glasses, her posture straightening. I failed to maintain that standard earlier. I'm attempting to correct that failure. In that moment, Samuel recognized what he was witnessing, not merely personal amends, but a professional recalibration. Valletta Harrington was re-examining her role as an educator, questioning patterns established over decades. What changed? He asked directly. She considered his question with uncharacteristic openness. Your notebook changed me, Mr. Johnson. It forced me to confront the reality that mathematical insight can emerge from contexts I hadn't respected. She met his gaze directly. And that my classroom had become an environment where some talents were encouraged while others were suppressed, by my own biases. It wasn't a complete transformation. Harrington remained demanding, exacting, and sometimes intimidating. But the prejudice that had filtered her perceptions had cracked, allowing her to see beyond categories to the individual student before her. For Samuel, this professional acknowledgement held more meaning than any personal apology could have conveyed. It represented a more fundamental recognition, that his mathematical voice deserved to be heard, regardless of the circumstances that had shaped it. I appreciate that, Professor, he said simply. As he left her office, Samuel touched his grandmother's cross, remembering her words about suffering having purpose. Perhaps the challenges he had endured at Westlake had served a purpose beyond his own education, prompting a teacher to examine assumptions that might otherwise have gone unquestioned throughout her career. The university auditorium hummed with anticipation as mathematics faculty, students, and several prominent journal editors gathered for the spring symposium. Samuel adjusted his tie nervously backstage, reviewing his presentation notes one final time. You're well prepared, Professor Harrington assured him, her typical directness softened by what might have been understanding. The work speaks for itself. 3 months of collaboration had transformed Samuel's intuitive insights into a formal paper titled, Novel Vector Approaches to Constrained Optimization Problems. Today marked its first public presentation before being submitted to the Journal of Computational Mathematics. I still can't believe they gave an undergraduate a presentation slot, Samuel admitted. They gave it to the mathematics, not the credential, Harrington corrected. Remember that when you're at the podium. From the stage, the symposium coordinator announced, our next presenter is Samuel Johnson from Westlake Academy, working in collaboration with Professor Valletta Harrington, on novel approaches to vector optimization. The audience applauded politely as Samuel took the stage. From his lapel hung a small pin in the shape of a cross, a graduation gift from his grandmother, who sat beaming in the front row beside Dylan and his family. In the 6 months since the calculus championship, Samuel's life had transformed. The Foster's Fellowship had eliminated his financial struggles, allowing him to focus entirely on his studies and research. Applications to elite universities, once seemingly unreachable dreams, now arrived with personalized recruitment letters from mathematics department chairs. Yet as Samuel began his presentation, explaining the mathematical journey that had led to his theoretical breakthroughs, he remained aware that the most significant transformation had occurred not in his circumstances but in the educational environment around him. Professor Harrington had become his most ardent advocate, challenging faculty who expressed skepticism about his unorthodox approaches. More importantly, she had initiated a departmental review of evaluation methods, questioning whether standard assessment practices might systematically disadvantage students from non-traditional backgrounds. The school's policy on religious symbols had been revised, with input from a student committee that included Samuel. The new approach emphasized respectful expression rather than blanket restrictions, acknowledging the diverse meanings such symbols carried for different students. As Samuel concluded his presentation, the applause was substantial, genuine appreciation from a community that valued mathematical insight regardless of its source. During the question period, established mathematicians engaged with his ideas substantively, treating him as a colleague rather than a curiosity. Afterward, at the reception, Samuel found himself surrounded by university representatives eager to discuss his graduate school plans. Amid this attention, he noticed Professor Harrington standing quietly at the periphery, observing with what appeared to be satisfaction. He excused himself from a Stanford recruiter and approached her. "Thank you for being here today. Your work deserved proper presentation," she replied matter-of-factly. Then, with unusual candor, she added, "You've taught me as much as I've taught you, Mr. Johnson. Perhaps more." Before Samuel could respond, his grandmother joined them, the cross around her neck gleaming in the reception hall lights. "Mrs. Johnson," Professor Harrington greeted her. "Your grandson has an extraordinary mathematical gift. He gets his determination from his grandfather," the older woman replied warmly. "But his heart, that comes from his parents." She touched her cross, then Samuel's pin. "Some inheritances aren't just about blood or talent. They're about faith in what's possible." As the reception continued around them, Samuel realized he stood at the intersection of his past and future, the grandmother who had nurtured his earliest ambitions, the teacher whose journey from antagonist to advocate reflected broader possibilities for change, and his own emerging identity as a mathematician whose voice had earned the right to be heard. The silver cross, once a source of conflict, now symbolized something more complex, not just personal faith, but faith in the potential for transformation, in the capacity of both individuals and institutions to grow beyond initial limitations and prejudices. Samuel wore it proudly, no longer as an act of defiance but as an affirmation of the journey that had brought him to this moment of recognition and possibility. Dear friend, stories like Samuel's remind us that brilliance exists in all communities, waiting to be recognized and nurtured. Too often, we judge based on appearance rather than ability, missing the extraordinary potential hiding in plain sight. Everyone deserves to be evaluated on their merits, not their background or beliefs. True education means growing beyond our biases to see the person behind our preconceptions. If this story moved you, please like this video to help others find it. Subscribe for more powerful narratives that challenge us to examine our assumptions and celebrate the triumph of human spirit against all odds.